Today might have been the most devastating day of the Trump presidency so far. A key witness to the Ukraine scheme provided evidence that there was a quid pro quo and that it was ordered by the president himself. For more on this, it's time for a closer look. Today, we heard from Trump's handpicked ambassador to the European Union, a guy named Gordon Sondland. Sondland's testimony was explosive, shocking, and jaw-dropping. And if you don't believe me, let's just fast forward to the moment when, after Democrats finished questioning Sondland, the camera cut over to GOP Congressman Devin Nunes.
That concludes our 45 minutes. I now recognize Mr. Nunes. Oh, okay. Why don't we take a 5 or 10 minute break?
Thank you.
Man, look at his face. He looks like he just walked in on his parents having sex with someone else's parents. There's only two explanations for that face. Either he just heard lengthy testimony detailing a criminal scheme so shocking it could bring down the presidency of Donald Trump, or he sharted and he's trying to remember how far away his backup pants are. Sondland's testimony didn't just go straight to President Trump. It also involved virtually everybody at the highest levels of the administration. Sondland named every name in the book.
Secretary Perry, Ambassador Volker, Rudy Giuliani, Secretary Pompeo, Brian McCormick, Miss Kenna, Chief of Staff Mulvaney, Rob Blair, Vice President Pence, ASAP Rocky.
He named ASAP Rocky. Sondland name-checked virtually all of Trump's senior aides: Vice President Mike Pence, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Energy Secretary Rick Perry, Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, and Trump's lawyer Rudy Giuliani. Even the White House janitor was like, "Am I gonna go to jail?" In short, today we learned yet again that the entire Trump White House is basically one giant criminal conspiracy. This was like the Wizard of Oz of impeachment testimony. You were there, and you were there, and you were there too, Mike. You were the scarecrow. Now, before we get to the rest of today's bombshell testimony, it's important to provide some context for why today was the most shocking day of testimony so far. Throughout this impeachment process, we've been watching the Republican argument morph in real time, which makes sense because Trump always looks like he's morphing. He looks like a anamorph who's halfway between human and bobcat. For example, you'll recall that Trump began by insisting there was no quid pro quo with Ukraine, and that his phone call with the president of Ukraine, in which Trump literally said the words, "I would like you to do us a favor," was perfect. But as the impeachment process has proved, it definitely was not perfect. Republicans have changed their argument. For example, yesterday, two credible witnesses who were on Trump's call called it unusual, inappropriate, and improper. And even a Republican witness, a national security official named Tim Morrison, said straight up that Sondland had told him Trump was holding up the aid to Ukraine in exchange for a promise from Ukraine to announce publicly that they were investigating Trump's political rivals.
What did Ambassador Sondland say to tell you that he told Mr. Yermak?
That the Ukrainians would have to have the prosecutor general make a statement with respect to the investigations as a condition of having the aid lifted.
There you go. That's literally a quid pro quo. Republicans actually thought calling this guy as a witness would be a good idea. They thought he would help their case, but he only made it worse. It's like if you murdered a guy and called his ghost as your witness. "He's the one who killed me. Damn it, ghost! I thought you were on my side." So after Tuesday's hearings, Republicans decided to change their argument again. A House GOP aide described the change in messaging this way: "It has gone from 'there is no quid pro quo' to 'there's a quid and quo but not a pro' to 'even if there was a quid pro quo, it's not that bad. This is just how things are done. You can say it's bad, but it's not impeachable.'" My God, look how much their argument has changed. This would be like if you got pulled over and said, "I wasn't speeding." "Okay, I was speeding. Everyone speeds." "I was late for my job. I work at the hospital. So does my wife. And she's having a baby, and I was barely speeding." "Fine, I was really speeding. And my wife's not pregnant, and I don't have a wife. And also I'm drunk on cocaine." Which brings us to today's hearing. Remember, Sondland handpicked by Trump. He's a businessman who donated $1 million to Trump's inaugural committee, and he was a central figure in Ukraine policy. In fact, according to Morrison, officials in the Trump administration even coined a term for Gordon Sondland's role in Ukraine policy.
Among the discussions I had with Dr. Hill were about Ambassador Sondland. I think she might have coined it the Gordon problem.
That's what they called it, the Gordon problem? That sounds like an indie movie about a single guy in his 40s starring Ben Stiller. So today, Sondland had the chance to respond. Again, Sondland, a key middleman between Trump and Ukraine, and he wrote down what was happening in several infamous text messages, and he started out his testimony by stating clearly and unequivocally that everything they did at the direction of the president himself.
Secretary Perry, Ambassador Volker, and I worked with Mr. Rudy Giuliani on Ukraine matters at the express direction of the President of the United States. We followed the President's orders. We worked with Mr. Giuliani because the President directed us to do so.
He literally said over and over, the president told us to do this, and I believe it because no one would work with Rudy Giuliani unless they were ordered to. Working with Rudy is like when your mom makes you hang out with her friend's weird son. Why don't you take Rudy to the mall with you? Because he smells like onions and he never stops screaming. After Sondland made clear he carried out the president's orders, he went on to explain specifically that what Rudy Giuliani wanted was definitely a quid pro quo, and that he did it specifically because that's what Trump wanted.
Mr. Giuliani's requests were a quid pro quo for arranging a White House visit for President Zelensky. Mr. Giuliani demanded that Ukraine make a public statement announcing the investigations of the 2016 election, DNC server, and Burisma. Mr. Giuliani was expressing the desires of the President of the United States, and we knew these investigations were important to the President.
There it is. He just said it. This was a quid pro quo, and it definitely makes sense to me that Rudy was expressing the desires of the president. Rudy looks like the devil on Trump's shoulder, except Trump would never need a devil. You should commit quid pro quo. Way ahead of you, tiny devil. Again, Sondland made clear that Trump had specifically directed his administration, people who actually work for the U.S. government and get paid with your taxpayer dollars, to orchestrate a quid pro quo with Rudy Giuliani, who has no official government role. And Sondland said they were not happy about it.
President Trump directed us to, quote, talk with Rudy. We understood that talk with Rudy meant talk with Mr. Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal lawyer. Let me say again, we weren't happy with the president's directive to talk with Rudy.
Of course they weren't happy. No one is happy to talk to Rudy. If you get cornered by Rudy at a party, your only option is to pretend you're choking. And even then, Rudy would only make things worse. I know the Heimlich. Look, I can do it on myself. But this brings us to a crucial point. It wasn't just Trump and Rudy. Sondland made it clear that a number of high-level officials in the Trump White House and some people outside the White House were aware of what was happening as it was happening. Sondland said he had emails to support his account. And again, Sondland specifically used the words quid pro quo.
These emails show that the leadership of the State Department, the National Security Council, and the White House were all informed about the Ukraine efforts. I shared concerns of the potential quid pro quo regarding the security aid with Senator Ron Johnson. We kept the leadership of the State Department and the NSC informed of our activities. And that included communications with Secretary of State Pompeo. They knew what we were doing and why. Everyone was in the loop. Again, everyone was in the loop.
Think about that. He just said everyone was in the loop, which makes clear once again that these guys are the worst criminals in the world. They orchestrated an illicit scheme to pressure a foreign country to interfere in a presidential election, and they basically sent out a staff-wide email CCing everyone. Subject crimes. Hey, all, we're doing crimes. Wanted to make sure you all know about the crimes. If you have questions about the crimes, please email crimes@whitehouse.gov/crimes. Sondland also said... He also said he'd reviewed other State Department documents that had been previously not made public, which must have scared the hell out of Giuliani and Trump.
I've reviewed other State Department documents, some of which are not currently in the public domain, detailing Mr. Giuliani's efforts.
The only part of that sentence that shocks me is they weren't in the public domain. Remember, Giuliani's already done multiple TV interviews where he literally held up his phone and his iPad to show off his communications with Trump officials. I mean, I'm shocked Rudy didn't come sprinting into the hearing with his phone in his hand, screaming, "He's right, I missed one, it's right here. I got a selfie of me in Ukraine with a shirt that says, I love quid pro quos." Sondland also provided damning firsthand accounts of his conversations with Trump himself and had very specific recollections of phone calls he had with the president where he asked him what was going on.
I thought it was a very bad idea to hold that money. I finally called the president. I believe I just asked him an open-ended question, Mr. Chairman. What do you want from Ukraine? I keep hearing all these different ideas and theories and this and that. What do you want? And it was a very short, abrupt conversation. He was not in a good mood.
That doesn't surprise me. Trump's never in a good mood. He only has two modes. He's either screaming at reporters on the White House lawn or glaring directly into the camera like a burglar caught on a doorbell camera. I mean, look at him. Compare his face to the face Nunes is always making. Nunes looks like a mailman who just saw a Rottweiler, and Trump is the Rottweiler. Now, Sondland had multiple conversations with Trump. For example, you might remember the infamous phone call Sondland had with Trump, in which Trump was overheard asking Sondland directly about the investigations he wanted. A State Department official who was with Sondland at the time also testified that he overheard Sondland tell Trump that the president of Ukraine would do anything for him and that he, quote, loves your ass. And again, Sondland confirmed that he did indeed say that to Trump.
He also testified that you confirmed to President Trump that you were in Ukraine at the time and that President Zelensky, quote, loves your ass, unquote. Do you recall saying that?
Yeah, it sounds like something I would say. Putting it in Trump speak by saying he loves your ass, he'll do whatever you want, meant that he would really work with us.
Yeah, man, that's the president we got. I mean, the one who likes to know how foreign leaders feel at any given moment about his ass. Show them that picture of me getting on the helicopter. I think it looks really good in that one. Now, today, Trump responded to Sondland's testimony on his way to Texas, confirming that he spoke to Sondland by phone. But at first, his account of that call made no sense whatsoever.
Just a quick comment on what's going on in terms of testimony with Ambassador Sondland. And I just noticed one thing, and I would say that means it's all over. What do you want from Ukraine? He asks me, screaming. What do you want from Ukraine? I keep hearing all these different ideas and theories. This is Ambassador Sondland speaking to me. Just happened. To which I turned off the television. What do you want from Ukraine? I keep hearing all these different ideas and theories. What do you want? What do you want? It was a very short and abrupt conversation that he had with me. They said he was not in a good mood. I'm always in a good mood. I don't know what that is.
First of all, that's the worst audition for a school play I've ever seen. Just so you know, I'm not off book. Second, you're never in a good mood. You're literally screaming right now. You can't scream, I'm always in a good mood. That's a sentence that refutes itself. It's like a librarian screaming, everyone keep your voices down! Now, Trump went on to quote Sondland's testimony. Sondland said that after months of following the president's explicit orders to carry out the quid pro quo he and Rudy wanted, he called Trump to get a straight answer. Now, to be clear, this call happened after the whistleblower wrote their report and officials expressed concern about what Trump was doing. So Trump suddenly changed his tune, and he told Sondland, never mind, forget about all that quid pro quo stuff.
It was a very short, abrupt conversation. He was not in a good mood. And he just said, I want nothing. I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. Tell Zelensky to do the right thing. Something to that effect. This is the final word that I heard from the President of the United States.
So here's my answer. I want nothing. I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. Tell Zelensky to do the right thing. Then he says, this is the final word from the President of the United States.
Yeah, but no, it's not. You already got caught. That doesn't make you sound innocent. That sounds like the way a criminal talks when he thinks his phone is tapped. I want nothing. Certainly not a quid pro quo, since that would be illegal. And now I'm off to church because I'm a good boy. But if you're looking for one single image to capture everything that happened today, I'd direct you to this photo of Sondland looking directly into the camera during a break in the hearing. Damn, I mean, he smelt it and dealt it. He looks like he's in the opening credits of The Real Housewives. My name's Gordon. I may not quit or crow, but I'm definitely a pro. Seriously, looks like he just threw a match on a building soaked in gasoline. Today was certainly the most devastating day in the impeachment process so far, and perhaps the most devastating day in the Trump presidency. A key witness to the corrupt quid pro quo said he was following the orders of the president and named several senior officials who also knew about the scheme. And the Republican defense crumbled before our eyes. This is it. If Republicans had any integrity at all, they look at the evidence and tell Trump.
That means it's all over.
This has been a closer look.